When people talk about Saddam Hussein's brutality, most think of his regime's wars, mass executions, or chemical attacks. But hidden inside his palaces was another terror, one not carried out by the dictator himself, but by his eldest son, Uday Hussein. To many Iraqis, Uday was known simply as the Devil's Prince, a man who lived in palatial luxury, drove fleets of supercars, and threw lavish parties, all while tormenting women with a cruelty that is hard to comprehend. Born in 1964, Uday was Saddam's first son, the heir apparent to the Iraqi dictatorship. From an early age, he was told he was untouchable. Teachers, guards, and servants all bowed to him. Every whim was indulged. By his teenage years, he was already carrying pistols to school, flaunting power with a smirk. In a country where dissent meant death, nobody dared say no to him, not even Saddam himself. This lack of limit shaped Uday into a monster. He grew obsessed with dominance, especially over women. To him, they were trophies, not people. And with his father's backing, there was no law that could protect them. Uday's cruelty towards females was notorious in Baghdad. He frequently prowled the streets in luxury cars, surrounded by armed guards, pointing out women he desired. Once marked, there was no escape. Reports suggest he kidnapped women in broad daylight, dragging them into his vehicles, sometimes directly outside universities or shopping centers. Even daughters of high-ranking officials weren't safe, because who would dare challenge Saddam's son? One chilling account describes how Uday stormed into a wedding celebration, saw the bride, and had her abducted before the reception even ended. Another report claims he would seize TV presenters, models, or even athletes' wives, holding them in his compounds for days or weeks. Some women returned home broken, others never returned at all. In 1984, Saddam handed Uday control of Iraq's Olympic Committee and National Sports Federation. On the surface, it seemed like a move to polish his son's image. In reality, it became another tool of abuse. Athletes who lost matches weren't just scolded, they were tortured. Some were beaten with cables, forced to run until collapse, or thrown into prison cells filled with sewage. But women tied to sports often suffered even worse. A female athlete who refused his advances risked never competing again, or vanishing altogether. Uday's office at the Olympic headquarters wasn't just a workplace, it was a hunting ground. What made Uday even more terrifying was how openly he committed these crimes. He didn't hide in the shadows, he flaunted his power. Guests at his parties whispered about women being led away in tears, about screams echoing through the walls of his mansions. Yet no one stopped him. Not the police, not the courts, not even Saddam. His father might scold him for recklessness, but punish him? Never. For Uday, women weren't human beings. They were reminders of his absolute power. And that power would only grow more twisted in the years to come. If Uday Hussein's public life was filled with excess and arrogance, his private life was far worse. Behind the gilded walls of Baghdad's palaces, he created an empire of fear. Rooms where laughter and music at his parties would suddenly give way to screams. For the women who were brought inside, Uday's world was not luxury, it was a prison. Inside Uday's Rashid Palace, investigators later uncovered evidence of what survivors already knew. He had built private torture chambers for his own twisted entertainment. Witnesses said the chambers were soundproofed, equipped with restraints, and decorated not like a prison, but like a playroom, because for Uday, cruelty was a game. Women who rejected him, resisted him, or even showed hesitation were dragged into these rooms. Some were beaten mercilessly. Others were subjected to humiliations designed to break them completely. There were rumors that he branded women with heated metal, leaving scars shaped like horseshoes. To him, these weren't just punishments, they were marks of ownership. Unlike most predators, Uday didn't act in secret. He flaunted his crimes. Party guests described how he would summon women into side rooms, and hours later they'd emerge disheveled, crying, or not at all. One former servant claimed he videotaped assaults and kept the recordings as trophies. Even his father's inner circle whispered about the horrors. Diplomats and Ba'ath Party elites feared inviting their daughters to events where Uday might be present. Yet no one dared stop him. To cross Saddam's eldest son was to risk execution, or worse. Accounts from those who escaped paint a picture almost too disturbing to believe. One woman recalled being abducted from the University of Baghdad after refusing his advances. She was held for days, beaten and assaulted, before being dumped back at the gates of her school. Another young bride was taken from her wedding party in front of her guests, her family powerless to intervene. Even Iraq's medical community wasn't safe. Reports claim Uday targeted female doctors and nurses, forcing them to attend his parties. Refusal often meant professional ruin or disappearance. For ordinary Iraqi women, the possibility of encountering Uday was a nightmare. His motorcade of luxury cars became a symbol of dread. When it appeared, streets emptied. Parents pulled their daughters indoors. And still, the rumors spread of women vanishing after chance encounters at restaurants, shops, or even traffic lights. In a regime already built on fear, Uday's behavior added another layer. A private terror that specifically targeted women, making daily life in Baghdad even more dangerous. By the mid-1990s, Uday's reputation was so notorious that even Saddam's allies began to fear the damage he was causing to the regime's image. Yet he remained untouchable. Saddam might scold him, even exile him temporarily after particularly reckless episodes, but the punishments never lasted. He was always restored to power, always shielded from consequences. And that protection gave him what he craved most, the certainty he could do anything, and no one would stop him. For years, Uday Hussein lived as though nothing could touch him. He was Saddam's heir, his father's pride, and Iraq's most feared predator. But power built on cruelty is never invincible. By the 1990s, Uday's reckless violence had caught up with him, and the cracks in his armor began to show. On December 12, 1996, gunmen ambushed Uday's convoy in Baghdad. Armed with AK-47s, they riddled his car with bullets. For once, the Devil's Prince wasn't untouchable. He was left with more than a dozen gunshot wounds, partially paralyzed and suffering permanent damage to his spine and legs. Iraqis whispered that it was karma, that years of torment had finally returned to him. But even half-crippled, Uday remained dangerous. He recovered enough to walk again with a cane, and although his physical strength was weakened, his cruelty was not. Women were still kidnapped, parties still turned to nightmares, and fear still followed his name. By the early 2000s, Uday's reputation had spread worldwide. Journalists and defectors described his depravity, women abducted from weddings, doctors forced into his service, and a private zoo of exotic animals he starved or tortured for fun. Foreign governments, intelligence agencies, and even human rights organizations now openly call him one of the most sadistic figures alive. But inside Iraq, nothing changed. The people still whispered when his motorcade appeared. Parents still kept daughters indoors, and Uday still moved through his gilded palaces with a sense of immortality, believing his father's rule would never end. In 2003, the US-led invasion of Iraq shattered that illusion. Saddam's regime collapsed in weeks. As statues fell and ministries burned, Uday and his younger brother, Qusay, fled Baghdad, hiding in safe houses across northern Iraq. For the first time in his life, the Devil's Prince was hunted. On July 22, 2003, American forces received intelligence that the brothers were holed up in a mansion in Mosul. The 101st Airborne surrounded the house. When Uday and Qusay refused to surrender, a 4-hour firefight erupted. Helicopters circled. Rockets shook the building. By the end, the palace was reduced to rubble, and Uday Hussein was dead at just 39 years old. When Iraqis saw images of Uday's body, many felt a grim sense of relief. The man who had terrorized women, athletes, and even his father's closest allies was finally gone. For years, justice had seemed impossible, but his death marked the end of a nightmare that had haunted Baghdad for decades. Still, the scars remained. The women he tormented, the families he destroyed, and the fear he spread couldn't be erased with his death. Uday Hussein's story is remembered not just as a tale of cruelty, but as a warning of what happens when unchecked power and absolute impunity fall into the hands of a sadist. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.